Chapter 5, The Video Store's Indictment of Mr. Johnson. The following is the video store's version of how the government should indict Mr. Johnson for the federal laws that he violated. The video store believes that it was possible that Mr. Johnson could be indicted for at least 6 violations of federal law, which are the following. Violation number 1. Credit card fraud. Mr. Johnson knowingly used a credit card to obtain $1,000 or more within the 1-year period that he was employed by the video store. He used the video store's point-of-sale terminal to accomplish his scheme. For this violation of federal law, Mr. Johnson could be fined no more than $10,000 or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. Violation number 2, conspiracy. Mr. Johnson, with the help of one or more persons, embezzled funds from the video store where he was employed. For a violation of this offense, Mr. Johnson could be fined and imprisoned for no more than 5 years, or both. The video store felt that without the help of at least one person, Mr. Johnson wouldn't have been able to keep his scheme from being detected for as long as he did. Violation number 3, access device fraud. Mr. Johnson knowingly and with the intent to defraud used the video store's point-of-sale terminal within the 1-year period that he was employed by the video store to fraudulently obtain at least $1,000 or more for his personal use. According to Mr. Johnson's videotape confession, he embezzled $46,000. He could be fined or pay twice the value obtained by the offense, whichever is greater, or imprisoned for not more than 15 years or both. Violation number 4, mail fraud. Mr. Johnson devised a scheme to obtain money by using the video store's point-of-sale terminal. In doing so, he inadvertently used the mails because the video store's bank, the credit card bank, and Mr. Johnson's bank all used the mail to send out their monthly statements. This was very important in the perpetration of Mr. Johnson's scheme because he was able to see that the transactions that he was making was going through. The credit card statement was probably very important to Mr. Johnson because of the monthly payments that he was making on his mother's Visa account. Mr. Johnson also used the mails when he paid bills by personal checks written from his Mac Visa account. Remember, this was the same account that he was transferring the fraudulent sales that he made at the video store. If Mr. Johnson is indicted for mail fraud, he could be fined not more than $1 million or imprisoned not more than 5 years, or both. Since Mr. Johnson's scheme involved 3 financial institutions, he could be imprisoned up to 30 years, plus the fine. Violation number 5, wire fraud. Since Mr. Johnson used an access device to perpetrate his scheme, he violated the wire fraud law because the video store's point-of-sale terminal was connected to the telephone line. Since Mr. Johnson's scheme involved 3 financial institutions, he could be fined not more than $1 million or be imprisoned up to 30 years, or both. Violation number 6, bank fraud. Mr. Johnson knowingly executed a scheme to defraud a financial institution when he transferred money from an authorized credit card to his Mac Visa account by using the video store's point-of-sale terminal. There were 3 different banks involved in every transaction that Mr. Johnson made. They are the credit card bank, Mr. Johnson's Mac Visa bank, and the video store's merchant bank. For this violation of federal law, Mr. Johnson could be fined not more than $1 million or be in prison not more than 30 years, or both. Following is the three bases that make a person guilty of a crime. Base number 1. A person is guilty if the person himself or herself committed the crime, that is, actually perpetrated the crime. Base number 2. A person is guilty as a co-conspirator if the person was a member of the conspiracy when the crime was committed, and if it was committed in the furtherance of or as a foreseeable consequence of the conspiracy. Base number 3. A person is guilty of a crime committed by someone else if the person aids and abets the commission of the crime. If any one or more of these three bases is shown by the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, that is, that the person was the actual perpetrator of the crime, that the person was responsible as a co-conspirator, or that person was an aider or abettor, the person may be found guilty of the crime charged. The video store, doing its investigation, applied these three bases to Mr. Johnson when they drew up their indictment against him. It is not up to the video store to decide the guilt of Mr. Johnson. It's up to a court of law. Even though the video store's indictment of Mr. Johnson is factual, they didn't think that they were judge, jury, and executioner, and didn't want to be held responsible for the wrongdoing by Mr. Johnson.